All right, so next we're going to talk about engineer meetings, and just to understand, this is a point, and what engineer meetings are designed for is when we have a full denial or we're potentially heading down the path of a full denial, the carrier sends out an engineer. And this engineer from the carrier side, which we're going to bring one from our side as well, is designed to stack the file to where if they do choose to go to litigation, which is where they're headed anyway, they have an 80 or 100 page forensic backup to go to the judge and say, hey, look, we're going by our expert's recommendation. He told us that there's no storm damage on the building and that that it's all existing maintenance items, and it has nothing to do with storm damage. Or even if it is storm damage, they're going to downplay it and say, well, it is damaged by the storm, but it's still functionally viable, and so it'll still keep shedding water, and so you're okay. Okay, and then they put their engineer stamp on it. And apparently it's an adopted science within the court system. So these carriers spend millions of dollars a year with the same firms. Most people think, they're randomly picking these firms, but if you notice, they're always going to be Hague or Donen or Rimkus or Nelson Engineering, these large firms. They're always going to be the same exact firms that these carriers spend millions of dollars a year servicing to go out and write these reports. And it's an unspoken rule that these reports are to be written in a manner that allows the carrier to skirt from paying the indemnity. So understand that you're not going to go out there and debate with an engineer and get him and convince him to pay for the roof. This is not a second adjuster's meeting, okay? This is literally, these guys are one-sided, they're completely biased. And so the only thing that we're there to do is investigatory work, which that's going to be led by our engineer. We're not going to go out there and kind of, engage with the other engineer, because all they're going to do is not tell you anything. They're literally going to keep their cards close to the chest. You'll notice that even if you ask them, hey, what about this? What about this? They'll say, well, I don't know. I have to look at my photos later when I get back to the office. They're never going to divulge their position out there, hardly ever. And if they do, then it's probably a good sign, and they're probably just out there as a formality to document damage because of the size of the loss. Now, typically we'll still see engineers on anything over $300,000-$400,000, and when it gets upwards close to $1 million, understand that the more tight-lipped that these engineers are going to be, because they want the carrier to make their decision. They're just going out there to document the file. Now, what we can do is, you as a salesman, I don't want you going out there and spending all day, every day, especially with like a 2-day engineer meeting. There's no sense in you being out there all day, every day. But what you can do is, when you're out there, number one, you can document yourself with photographs. So document when the engineer is doing some of his write-ups. Maybe you document that with photographs, okay? Also, it's a good learning experience. One of the ways that you learn the most about damage theory and forensics is by listening to these two engineers interact. So if you're at an engineer meeting where both engineers are present, that would be a good learning experience for you as a salesperson, because it's going to allow you to hear things not only from the opposing engineer side, but also ours as well, okay? So sometimes you will learn things from our own engineer that you didn't know before. So that's a great opportunity for you to be there. That can help forge your career, okay? You can hear things from the opposing engineer side and then learn how to overcome those, in case maybe down the line some of your information can be relevant to the engineer meeting, okay? The other thing that I like to do, if the engineer becomes sometimes adversarial, I like to pull out my telephone and start recording it, video recording it. Now, sometimes the opposing engineer, their firm has a policy that you can't record us while we're doing our work. Obviously that's pretty suspect, but I do it anyway, especially when it's an adversarial situation. I'm just going to document and video record what they're doing, so that way I can forward that on to our legal team and have them help the client out later and document these things, okay? But the most important thing of all, and what we've newly implemented, is when we're going to an engineer meeting, because you guys are salespeople. The engineer is not a salesperson. He's just there to do his engineering work, okay? I want you guys to get down, especially if we have neighboring buildings. If you don't have neighboring buildings and you have to drive, more than a quarter mile, maybe not even do it. If it's more than a quarter mile, half a mile down the road, maybe it's not even relevant. But the point is, if you're there at the engineer meeting and we have a causation issue, causation is defined as when the event happened. That's causation. When did the event happen? Okay? And a lot of our engineer meetings end up in a dispute of causation. Did this happen on my watch? It's much easier for the carrier to look at a storm report with 50 hail dates. A lot of those will be outside of their coverage period. It's easier for them to dispute causation, to say this didn't happen during our coverage period, than it would be to actually look at functional damage or physical damage to a roof and say this damage will not affect the long-term life of the roof system. That's a harder argument to win than it is to say, well, out of these 50 storms, how did this one storm fall on our watch when the other 49 did not fall on our watch? It's an easier argument to win. So the carriers typically go down that path. And so if we're there to establish causation, when did this happen? When did this hail actually hit? Because there's no science. There's no adopted science on metal or an asphalt-based system that can pinpoint a timestamp as to when that hail fell or that wind event fell on that roof, okay? So since we know that, and that argument is harder to win, they're going to use these storm reports, and it seems more viable to say, hey, look, how did 49 events not hit this building, but the 1 out of 50 did, and it happened to have been on our watch? It doesn't seem logical. It doesn't seem plausible. So the carrier oftentimes getting these causation events. What we've learned through not only our experience, but through our legal advisors, is that in order to help establish causation, there's nothing better than an eyewitness within proximity. Nothing better. So what I want you guys to do as salespeople, and this is the most important thing that you can do at an engineer's meeting, is I want you to get down and I want you to knock the doors of the adjacent neighbors on all sides, whether it be on the back, on the front, caddy corner, or on the left and right of the property. And if you can get more than one, even better. Even better. But go and talk to those neighbors and ask them, hey, there was a hailstorm on this date at this time. Now, these storm reports have a time and date stamp on the hail report. So you go to that neighbor and say, look, this hail report fell on this day and this time. Were any of you guys here during that time? Can I talk to anybody without here that may have witnessed hail falling on the cars in your parking lot, or maybe saw the hail fall on this adjacent building next door? Can I talk to that person? It's very important because we're in a major legal battle with your neighbor over here and his carrier. They're trying to establish when this hail fell, and we think it happened on this day. Wondering if there's anybody working in your building on that day that we could talk to. Okay? So if you find that person, we're going to document that. And then you're going to go back over and grab our engineer and have him hand walked over there and say, can you explain to this engineer when this happened and how this hail happened? Or maybe you even pick up the phone and call the engineer and say, hey, can you come over? I have an eyewitness. That engineer, or our engineer, is going to come over here, interview that person for 5-10 minutes and ask them. Now that information is relevant to the report. It will enter our engineer's report, and it's a smoking gun for causation. Because you can sit here and get all the hail reports in the world. Some of those hail reporting companies are even owned by insurance companies themselves. And there's nothing more solid than an eyewitness, because those algorithms and those storm reports are not 100% conclusive, but an eyewitness is. And it carries a lot of weight in a courtroom, and the carrier knows it. It's one of the most important things in the carrier's file. And oftentimes when we see that information in the carrier's file, the carrier is more apt to pay that claim without getting in a further dispute. Oftentimes we see them, and I've seen carriers many, many times in the past, pay the claim before the engineer report even comes out, because they know it's coming down the pike. So also, if you can go and gather more than one neighbor, it's even more compelling, okay? So try to get at least a couple if possible. The other thing that it's going to do for you during this engineer meeting is you'll let them know, hey, we're in a dispute with this carrier. They're trying to figure out when this happened, because there's been so many hailstorms over here Now the carrier is potentially denying this claim, but I think we're going to get it paid. And if we can get theirs paid, it will help maybe get your roof paid if you're interested in me looking at yours, because if hail fell on their building and their carrier's in dispute over a $200,000 roof or whatnot, we don't want you to get in that same dispute because you've waited so long to file. Why don't you have me look at your roof while I'm here? When I get done with this engineer meeting, I can come over and look at your roof as well. Does that make sense? So that will help you gain more clients as well, because you're going to be approaching them and saying, hey, can you help me? And then all of a sudden, we're going to throw in the whole data from a hail claim and a roof and new roof and insurance and all that kind of jazz that maybe you couldn't get through to them on a previous cold call. Maybe you did previously cold call them and you're like, hey, it's me again. Hey, we're over at your neighbors and we're in a dispute over when this hail damage occurred on their building. And I wondered if one of your guys could maybe be an eyewitness for us if they saw the hail. And then you can further get into the whole, hey, let me inspect your roof. So I believe it's an opportunity to gain customers. But it's also, we have an ability to have a smoking gun against the carrier. And I think our win rate is going to be exponential. So make sure that when you're at the site during the engineer meeting, your main focus is to gain knowledge, listen to both sides of these engineers, be observant, photo and video when need be, when it makes sense. And if you need to call me or one of your superiors and ask them, hey, is it relevant to videotape? Here's the situation that I'm in. Maybe we do that. But the best thing of all is to get down and go knock the door of the adjacent neighbors and try to get an eyewitness. Okay? When you do obtain that eyewitness, call the engineer on our side, have him come over and interview that person to document. Okay? It's very, very important. Okay? And lastly, try to gain that customer gain that eyewitness as a customer. Because obviously, if they saw hail fall on their parking lot or their cars during this event and maybe saw it hit the adjacent building, then it probably hit their roof as well. So it opens you up for more customers and a more solid causation for your claim.